Okay, I think we're going live now. So here, I'll do a quick introduction. So my name is Nick. I'm with Sync Logistics Training, and this is our first learning and development webinar. And I guess before we kick things off, since this is the first one, I'm going to do a quick just like introduction on like what we're doing and why we're doing these, and then we'll kind of get into things. So I wanted to put out these learning and development webinars just because the topic tends to be sort of like neglected in the brokerage space. And really what I wanted to do is put together just like an educational resource for folks where they can get some actionable takeaways, take back to their own brokerages, improve their own training programs, and like really improve, like I said, the training for the individuals that they're working with. And rather than just having myself sit here and run my mouth on LinkedIn like I usually do, I wanted to bring in some guests who have like actual expertise in the area so they can share some of their advice and some of their experience with people. Like I said, so it's not just me talking all the time. And I'll use that as a quick segue into introducing some folks. Georgette, you want to kick things off?
Sounds great. Thanks, Nick. So I'm Georgette Hunter Franklin, the Director of Learning and Development at Mode Global, and we're headquartered in Dallas, Texas. I've been with Mode about 2 years in December, and in the learning and development space for almost 20 years. So super excited to join you today, Nick.
Oh, thanks for being here. Mike, you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Mike Riccio. I'm with a company called More Than Miles Consulting. I am a business coach and consultant in the transportation logistics space. Prior to that, I worked in a family business called Leonard's Express with my wife and 3 brother-in-laws and in-laws at the time, and am still on the board of the Transportation Intermediaries Association as the past chairman, and have worked with various brokers and transportation companies throughout the years.
Perfect. And Scott, you're up. Freight Sensei.
Yeah. Some people call me the Freight Sensei, but yeah, Scott Watanabe, the Director of Agent Training and Growth here at Armstrong Transport Group. Been working with Armstrong for about 10 years, did the ops part for 6 or 7 years, stepped into the training role. So I became the Director of Training and right before COVID, but was still able to slowly start from nothing to, a 3-ring binder full of stuff, to adopting a LMS, and then doing combined e-learning, virtual-led, instructor-led training to what we call it, the Armstrong Navigator training program now, and then recently went and transferred to the agent success team, where I can now teach the agent side and any of their onboarding individuals. Their individual agents are onboarding. I teach them and kind of go through their onboarding as well. So it's fun. It's I love the learning and development part of it, teaching people how to succeed, just as I would say I had before. So it's glad to be on here, Nick. Appreciate the invite. So.
Well, yeah, man. No, I appreciate everyone taking time out of their day to jump on this. So each one of these, we're planning on doing a separate topic. And today's topic is going to be creating a culture of learning. And it's funny, in my opinion, at least, it's a really foundational thing when it comes to scaling your organization and developing employees. But I'd be willing to bet that a lot of folks in this space, one, have never heard the term, and probably definitely don't know what it means, how to execute on it, or the impact that it can have. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about creating a culture of learning. And we're going to start very broad, and from there kind of get more granular as we go through the webinar today. So to kind of kick things off with our very broad starting question here, what is a culture of learning, and why is it important? What are the benefits of it? Georgette, I'm going to throw it to you to kind of kick things off here.
Sounds good. When I think about what a culture of learning is, it's simply the environment that you create when it comes to norms within your organization for learning. So how do we learn? When do we learn? Is there an expectation of learning within the company? And I think the benefits of a culture of learning is people know what to expect. Also, I feel like employees are more engaged when there is a culture of learning. They feel more valued. the byproduct of that is more productivity, more discretionary effort, because if an employee feels valued, then they're going to want to give more discretionary effort to the company. So definitely that productivity, that employee engagement. So that's what I think about when I think about the benefits of a culture of learning.
Yeah, I think that engagement thing is incredibly important. We've got a whole question tagged for that later on today. But Scott, what about you? Kind of that broad question. What is it and why is it important?
Well, I mean, you have to have. I mean, you've mentioned it before. Is the adoption creating? You can create anything you want. You can create processes. You can create a training plan, a training program, but you got to have adoption, and you got to have adoption. By having adoption, you have to have buy-in. So buy-in of your mid-level management, your higher level management. Obviously, these individuals are going to be benefiting from them. Hopefully, you put these new reps through a new training program, a new training process, and you're teaching them the basics of freight brokering in our world. And then they get assigned to the sales team. And if your mid-level managers don't buy in, then everything they've learned is kind of on the wayside. It's like, okay, what are you doing as far as continued development? And I think that's the next step is having something past the graduation date or past the, hey, you've done your certified freight broker, now what? That continued learning and that continued development is key to continuing that culture.
Yeah, I mean, it's like in my experience, at least, that's where a lot of brokers struggle, that continuing education piece.
Mhm.
Because like, even if you have that kind of new hire training down, that first, like, sometimes it's just like 1 week, sometimes it goes into like 3 months, like whatever the case may be. Like once you're a carrier rep or whatever, making X amount of money booking freight, like it really tends to fall off at that point. Like it gets deprioritized. And I'm going off on a tangent. Mike, what about you? Like, what is the culture of learning?
Well, if you think about it, a lot of times it's here, shadow this individual for a couple of days, and then you throw that person in, and then you wonder why that person doesn't succeed. But
Mhm.
kind of go back to what Georgette said about productivity. I think if you have a culture of learning, it does two things. One, if leadership shows some vulnerability, right? That, hey, we're open to ideas. We don't have this all figured out. We brought you in because we feel you can provide value. If you have that culture, that sparks the creativity, which sparks the productivity, right? People are more willing to take chances. They're more willing to think of new and unique ways to get the job done. And it's a more enjoyable workspace, quite frankly. And if you know there isn't retribution for every mistake, now if you're saying you're making the same mistake time and time and time again, well, that's a different conversation. But a lot of times, what happens is we all well know is you're typically a smaller company. It's an entrepreneur, and you're trying to bootstrap your business, and a day turns into a week, turns into a month, turns into a year, and you turn around like, how did I get here? And you don't. A lot of these companies don't take the time to create that training because they don't have the time, right? I got to make payroll. I got to cover this load. I've got to book this load, right? And it's hard to get people to stop and think about, hey, we need to create a process here. It doesn't have to be so formal that it doesn't give us any flexibility, but we need to create a process so that we can all be heading in the same direction and get to the same North Star. And the challenge is leaders sometimes, when they start their business, get caught up in that tyranny of urgency and don't do that. And so when you don't do that, it's like, again, like playing. I always tell people it's like playing whack-a-mole, right? It's a pretty reactive business to begin with, and today you whack this one down, tomorrow you whack that one down, and you're not creating that space to learn and develop, and ultimately helps the company and help yourself along the way.
So you touched on a lot of things there that like I'd like to kind of factor into the next question. So the next question is, like, how do you develop a culture of learning in your organization? And like, as we're going through this, I think it would be helpful for you guys to like maybe talk about like your own company or like your experience, like the size of your company and the level of sophistication. Because I think it depends if you're working at like a smaller mom and pop shop where you're just like really worried about just putting out daily fires versus a large organization. So I don't know, Scott, do you want to take this one first? How do you develop the culture?
Yeah, I think so, because we, as some people, I started in our Boise office, and our Boise office was an agency. We were an agency of Armstrong, so we were just an agent office, but we grew. We had massive growth, and I was, I think, number 15, between 15 and 20 number of that number of sales reps. Like when I started, there's 15 of us in the cubicle world, and we blew up, in 3-4 years to almost 150 reps in our office. And so we saw the need of training, because if some of us were in this industry early enough, it was, hey, sit by this guy, listen to a phone call this truck, see if you'd be interested in this load that you have no idea about. It was a flatbed load of lumber. I just remember that. I was the first person I called, like, hey, and it's, hey, listen to this guy. And so as we started to grow and we started adding more support office, you want to start looking at the processes that have worked and the processes that didn't work, start putting those SOPs on something, on a piece of paper. And then we essentially just took those SOPs, put them in a 3-ring binder, and then we organized it into, hey, this is the basics of what a freight broker does. This is some terminology you should learn. Now, this is the basics of track and trace. After that, how do you sell a load? How do you look for a truck? And you start organizing that until you get, a structure. And then you start evolving that based off of every class. And that's one thing we learned, is that every class we made little tweaks. Every class that came through, we made a tweak just to continue that development, continue that growth. And you have to be able to be open-minded and take critical feedback from these sales managers that get these reps, and they say, hey, they got to my team. This is what he was really good at. This is what he didn't know. Okay, so let's tweak this. Let's spend a little more in-person time on the cold call instead of just putting them in front of a video, or you adopt a cool tool like Sync Logistics Training that gives feedback, right? Utilize those tools, expand on your tools, and don't be afraid of critical feedback, just to make your department and make that whole process better.
So something that you mentioned there in terms of like kind of constantly like iterating the process and like kind of taking out the things that don't work and like really leaning into the things that do work. One thing I'd like to touch on at least later is like, how important is it to have like a single individual owning this process? And like, at least in my experience, that tends to be extremely important, because if it's just kind of like the pet project of the CEO, right, then training kind of falls by the wayside. So like my experience has been like, you need to have that individual who owns the process and actually make sure that stuff gets done. Otherwise, like that's when you devolve into just, hey, shadow this person, shadow this person, shadow this person. But like, that's been my experience.
You also have to have, I go back to the original, my intro is like having the buy-in, because if you have a process that you said, hey, this is the standard, but then they get to the team, but that standard never gets brought up to the leadership, and then the leadership pushes it back down and says, hey, this is the new standard. Make sure you are abiding by it, but also continuing to teach it. But then you get a sales manager or a sales team that hadn't got that communication yet and says, okay, oh, this is how we're doing it now. Okay, whatever Scott's teaching you, make sure you do that instead of them knowing it, because then it doesn't create the same amount of confidence in your organization. These are all stuff that we've learned just from building a department, and we're still learning. But you gotta have that buy-in of the sales managers and the understanding from the sales managers. When you have this process and you're teaching this process, I should be able to go to a sales manager and say, hey, what is our current process in issuing a fuel advance? And it's the same one that you taught.
Yeah, that's Nick, to build on what Scott's saying, I think sometimes people try to boil the ocean, right? They try to do too much at once. And so you just start with one one area of your company, whether it's carrier sales, whether it's administration, whether it's billing, whether it's invoicing. Because I think sometimes when we talk about training, we talk about sales, we talk about carrier sales. That back office is as important as the front side of it, because if you sell it and you bill it incorrectly, you don't bring the money in. So you have to train those people the same way. It might look a little different, but if you start in one area and then you build that process and then you hone that process in for that area, and then if you have multiple offices, like Scott said, you know, it's like McDonald's, right? A Big Mac, you want the Big Mac to taste the same as in Chicago as it does in Orlando, as it does in New York City. And so how do we transfer those processes across the company, whether it be in multiple locations or it be, you know, singular in different areas of the building? But I think if you start with just one area, get that the way you want it, and then bolt on the next vertical, bolt on the next job responsibility, bolt on the next job responsibility. In small units like that, it's much more manageable and it feels less overwhelming. And then you bring in somebody, like you indicated, who owns it, because if someone doesn't own it, it isn't going to get done.
Yeah, and I would agree. So one of the things, because I am newer to mode, so lots of learning experience, newer into the industry, was I started with our business objectives. So what are our business enterprise objectives? What gaps do we see in our respective groups? And then putting together a plan where we approach it. We call it Mode University. So the growth of our company and the growth of our talent, the external look and then an internal look. So how are we growing, cross-selling? How are we, again, developing people that are selling across modes? And then internally, how are we developing the competencies within our back office, our leaders? How are we growing that talent so they're able to coach and lead the folks that are on the front lines? And so that was one of the things that we did. And for me, and I always start with, what are our business objectives? Like, how are we making money? Will we continue to make money the same way? Do the folks that, the sales makers, do they know that? What is it that they need to know more or do more, better, differently? And then go to the experts and then give them a framework in which to develop training. So it's a different approach that I take, but I think always I start with leaders because that's the language that they speak. They speak the language of revenue, and I do as well. And then we go from there and build out a plan of what's needed. So then I can build any type of multi-year plan once we know what's needed and where the gaps are.
I froze briefly there. I think it was me and everyone else. But Georgia, you touched on this in the last 5 seconds. I'm sorry, but like, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on what Scott was saying about like leadership buy-in, because I know that that's something that you do that's like really important to you from having worked with you before. So I would love to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. It is one of the things that I talked about, which is speaking the same language as my leaders when it comes to enterprise objectives and what's going to drive revenue within the company, and just understanding what our objectives are at any given time, long term and short term, and then what is it that our employees need more of to help us meet those objectives. And so the way that I interact with our leaders is I do a lot of just listening. So speak to me about what's most important to your team. What do we need? And then from there, proposing solutions. Okay, so based on what I heard from the team on what's needed in the short term and long term, this is what's going to fill that gap with the time that we have. Does this work? Okay, then we 1, 2, 3 break. And then I partner with experts, because again, I've got the learning expertise, not the industry expertise. So oftentimes there's a partnership with the subject matter experts to give them the frameworks they need to be successful. But I don't do anything without my leaders. I talked to my CEO prior to this webinar about just our culture of learning and like what's most important to us when we think about learning and meeting people where they are.
Totally makes sense. I'll move on to the next question here. It's around employee engagement. So how, like you got all this training, that's amazing, but how do you actually get people to use it? How do you get people to engage with your training program? And Mike, I'll start with you on this one.
Well, certainly with the other two folks on here are in it daily. I'll give you some maybe some examples of people I work with and what they've done that's been successful. Certainly, anywhere you can make it interesting, whether you want to use the word gamify, contest, something along those ways, along those lines is somewhat successful. Everybody learns differently, right? For example, I'm a perfect example of that. I'm a visual learner. You can tell me till I'm blue in the face, and sometimes it just doesn't comprehend for me. I work on it. But everybody. So I think it's important that you understand how someone learns, and then try to have a platform to meet them where they are, as Georgette talked about, right? And whether you're a visual learner like me, maybe it's a video, and then we talk about the video and the follow-up. And I think that follow-up is also very key, because you can have someone check the box on a video or an article or a certain task that you want done repetitively for a period of time, have them physically do it and do the job. And then, but if you're not monitoring that, going back and did they comprehend what you just were teaching them? So I think it's a multitude of different things. I know that answer is a little bit of a cop-out, but it really is a combination of some audio, some video, some live training, some role playing, kind of a combination thereof, and then who gravitates to what area of how they learn their strength, and then trying to build upon that individually for that that person or group of people.
Yeah, I mean, not to get too sales pitchy here, but like I enjoyed everything you said, because it's what we're working towards with Sync, right? I mean, no one wants to sit in front of a video or like a PowerPoint or whatever for an hour and learn about anything. Like, you're going to lose interest in like 5 minutes. So like what we're working towards and trying to do is, like, sure, you have a little bit of video content, but you mix that up with some live training, with some simulated training, with some like gamified activities, like labeling states on maps or whatever. And it helps keep people going, right? It helps like increase that interest level. Georgette, I saw you nodding while Mike was talking. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, the two things that came to mind when Mike was talking was, what you mentioned, different modalities that Sync offers. So that's one of the things that we receive feedback, that there are different modalities. Nick, that's again one of the things that, just coming from a learning background, that I appreciated, that it would meet our learners in different places. The other thing is, the question was, how do you drive employee engagement? And it's what we talked about already: leader buy-in, and then also helping employees to understand with them, like, what's in it for me? Why should I learn? What is the learning intervention here? What's the purpose? And so I think I always start with the purpose, even after leader buy-in, because you have to have employee buy-in as well. So them understanding why they're taking a moment out of their day, 30 minutes, an hour, to complete whatever learning intervention you're putting in front of them.
I like what you added. Sorry, just hopping in, Nick. Sorry.
But this is what I want.
You're that just made me lose my train of thought. Oh, is the why, right? Understanding the why and being able to teach the why is going to get them more in, have them pay more attention to what they're learning. Because we can teach people, hey, this is how you pick up a phone. This is how you call a driver to make sure he's loaded with this, this, and this, and then make them do it. But they're going to be able to gain more value when they know why they're doing it. Oh, we're doing this because we want to provide the best customer experience to our clients. We want to make sure that, hey, when that customer asks for 1,000 cases on the truck, we're calling this to verify that the driver's actually making sure there's 1,000 cases on this truck. And why? Because that's just the level of service that we're going to provide as a third-party service provider for our clients. And so understanding that why, great point, is just going to help them learn and retain that knowledge.
Scott, you do something, your Freight Tip Tuesdays, the Instagram videos, that I absolutely love. And I talked about these a lot during like our prep call. But like, to me, like, I would think that really helps improve engagement, because it kind of keeps things fun, right? Like, that's my perspective from the outside. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Right. Well, what's funny is, like, I get those ideas from just walking out on the floor and listening to the issues that are happening on the floor. It's like, oh man, what could have we done better? Okay, well, I'm gonna write that down, put in my mental note. That could be my next Freight Tip Tuesday or Freight Tip Friday. But it's important because even we all consume because of the I guess the technological generation we live in. We consume videos 15 to 30 seconds at a time, and so if people can just get something little as, hey, you do proper check calls, that's going to help you just be a better broker, then that's going to be like, okay, maybe I should, right? So it's super fun.
It is super fun. I love them. The next question here is kind of related to employee engagement, but what are some challenges, right? And how do you overcome those challenges in terms of creating this culture of learning for folks? I forget who started the first one. I don't know. Georgette, you want to start this one?
I'll start. Time is always a challenge when it comes to anything training or learning, because anytime they're not selling, I mean, you're just competing with actual working time. And I think one of the ways that you can overcome that challenge is be very thoughtful in what you're putting in front of employees. Scott's Freight Tip Tuesday is a perfect example. They're learning, but in bite-sized pieces, right? There's bite-sized learning. The other way to overcome that is with asynchronous learning, which is what Sync offers to us. It's like, hey, you guys are all learning the same thing, but you're learning it in a time that works for you. So they're able to schedule that learning when they need it. So again, just asynchronous training, bite-sized learning, micro learning will help fit in that time without interrupting the business.
Mike, Scott, thoughts on?
Yeah, I would agree with Georgette. The biggest thing is certainly time and trying to convince people that by slowing down, you'll actually speed up, right? A lot of us get into the activity versus productivity scenario, right? We're just doing, right? We're just boom, 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 boom. And it just becomes second nature and rote. You're not even thinking through it. And so the work might get done, but maybe the work doesn't get done the way you want it to get done, both for the company or for yourself, and you don't have the results you're looking for. So trying to get leadership and management to say, hey, it's okay. We need to take a few minutes here. And by taking time away from them being on the floor, if we talk about a salesperson, we're really going to create better quality calls, and we should improve our close rate, which therefore we should improve the incentive to the employee and the bottom line to our company. So, but trying to that sometimes is counterintuitive to how we work, and so it's trying to go against our nature there to say it's okay for us to slow down because it's such a fast-paced business. It's okay if we slow down. Actually, we're going to do better quality work. Therefore, we're going to speed up. I don't know. That's kind of where my brain goes.
I think if you set the standard in the beginning for these newer reps at a certain time, certain day of the week, hey, this is your L&D point time. So plan your day around it. Tuesdays at 8:00, we do a micro learning. Set something like that up. Then it's a standard. Then they know, they're aware of it. Right now we do a Friday touch points, Friday afternoon touch points, where anybody that's been in the program and is still within that six to 8 months, we still have touch points with our trainees and our trainers go around, and I might not be logged in some kind of performance management, but sometimes we do, depending on the content that is touched on, where, hey, they know that, hey, I know my trainer Casey's going to be coming around at this time to talk to me, so I can hold on my questions, say, hey, yeah, I ran into this, I ran into this. This is what Josh told me, but this is also, with his sales leader, but this is also, hey, I want to confirm this is a correct process, or I want to confirm I'm doing this right. And then they're aware of it. And that's essentially creating a culture, right? They plan on seeing these trainers at least once a week until they get to a certain point. Then it's once a month, twice a month. That way they can they know when to ask the questions and when they can take advantage of that learning time.
So something that we've found success with, and I'm curious for your guys' thoughts on, is like some of our customers have really like selected one like internal advocate or like champion, if you will, of the training program, right? And it's usually either like a really high performing person or someone who they know is going to be super resistant to it. And they'll get that person on board with the training. And as long as like that person's doing it, a lot of the time the rest of the team members will follow their lead. So I'm kind of curious if you've experienced that as well.
It's interesting.
I'll share our advocate. I'll go ahead and go first. I think two things are beneficial for us. So we do, when we initially rolled out business specific training, I got a cross section of leaders from across the company to kind of be my guinea pigs, as we are yours today. So, and the question was, is this relevant and is this value added? You know, what works, what will work for your people and what won't. And so getting their their feedback on what they liked and what they didn't, that kind of built some internal advocates. From there, whenever we share learning with the team, leaders always go first. So a sales manager always goes before their sales team. So then they get to experience everything before their team does. So if there are kinks, they can help kind of share what's to come. If there's something, yeah, they're able to share that experience. So it is kind of my philosophy that leaders go first with our learning that we introduce.
Love that. Any other comments? If not, I can jump to the next question here.
No, I think I feel that will go with new tech implementation really well, or any kind of new processes, because you kind of want them. That's a great idea. Actually, I'm going to write that down. But because they have to be able to be maybe not subject matter experts, but they have to be familiar with it. When we rolled out a new CRM, it was kind of under a time crunch, because anytime you roll over something like that, that's replacing something old. You want to first know everything about it, but then you have like, hey, we have our old CRM is cutting off at this time, so these guys got to learn it.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they just throw it in the water or not, we can build upon it. But if your leaders aren't in there trying to learn it the best that they can, then it all falls down on the training team. And when you have a 200 and some reps to individually train, or at least do individual group trainings, that takes a lot of time from the trainers. And if your trainers are the only subject matter experts, and say you got 3 of them, that's a lot of time that you have to go out and you got to schedule. And it could be detrimental and to your sales processes. And essentially, like you're saying, you're saying slow is smooth is fast, in a sense. If you're just trying to go fast, nothing is smooth, so you're actually just slowing down.
No. Yeah, and along those lines, if you're not large enough to have trainers, if you have somebody that's a high performer, or I've never heard of the one that maybe is resistant. I think that's kind of interesting. But if you have a champion, if you don't have a trainer, you've at least got somebody that's performing that either other people are following because they see the results of that individual, or B, you're trying to consistently get this process, whatever that process may be, out to everybody else, again, on a consistent manner, so that the work's getting done the way you want it to get done, across the board evenly and consistently.
Yeah. And typically your high performers are going to be happy, because if people are coming to them to ask the same question maybe 10 times, they are going to welcome some training or learning that can help cull some of those questions, maybe give people a resource so they can focus on the sales. So those high performers are often definitely champions of what's to come.
Yeah, I love that we're talking about the high performers, because like in a lot of the companies that we work with, the high performers are sometimes the ones who are the resistant ones, because they're the ones who like already know everything and like they don't need the help. And like we consistently ask for feedback, and routinely we get feedback to the gist being, I didn't want to do this. I thought this was gonna be a complete waste of time, but I did it and I actually learned stuff, and this is probably a good resource for people. Like if you can win over that person, like you're gonna win over the rest of the team. At least that's been our experience.
No, that is so true, because then they realize, okay, they've been such high performers, they forget to go back to the basics sometimes, and so a lot of these high performers come from referrals. I mean, they're doing such a great job. Their business is easy. It comes, they get a referral from here, referral from there. They almost forget how to do a sales call. And so they got to go back to the basics. Like, oh yeah, I guess these are new processes. They haven't done a cold call in years because they haven't had to, right? They've created their organic growth within the network that they've built through relationships. And so going back to those, and I like to bring those individuals on in the role playing. I said, hey, today you get to play as a shipper. So you get to just grill this poor guy to no end on his cold call, just to get him thinking. And sometimes they're like, man, it's usually all the time after one of those sessions, they always say, hey, I appreciate it, because usually there's 2 or 3 of these individuals who play decision makers, and they all come with a different angle, whether it's something they've ran into this week, last week, within the market, and they want to see how other people would attack that call. And it's super important when it comes to developing new sales habits.
So Scott, I'll piggyback off of that with the next question. So you talked about like the mock calls. You talked about previously you do like the Friday check-ins. You do the Tuesday freight tips. Like, how do you incorporate more training into people's day-to-day? So like, what would be some actionable takeaways for people to bring back to their own brokerage? Like, what can you do every day to get people to get more training in people's lives?
So when they're still part of the training team, I'll throw out a what's today's term? Terminology of the day. What's the term of the day? And it could be, okay, what's demurrage mean to you? What's drayage mean to you? What is a lumper? Like these guys have only been here for three weeks. They probably learned it on day 1, day 2, but okay, now I got to remember what he said. Lumper. What is that? Oh, that's the guy who's unloading the truck, right? Usually a fee, and that fee's got to be reported to depends on if it's a TMS, and all that stuff. We just throw a term out for the day, and sometimes even we find new terms, and we're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. For the longest time, it just blew my mind. Probably a couple years ago, I read the definition of intermodal. And in my mind, for the longest time, I thought it was just rail. Like it's just, oh, you talk intermodal, it's the putting on a rail. That's it. When it's like, no, there's a whole front end and a back end to this intermodal business. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. I don't know why I would never think that, but because it's not in my wheelhouse, and it's something that you don't delve into until I call it situational learning. You don't need to learn it until that situation comes up, right? You get a lot of that in this industry. Yeah. I had a guy 2 years in it. He's just like, comes up. He's like, how do I issue a fuel advance? I'm like, how have you not issued a fuel advance? He's like, I've never had to issue a fuel advance. I'm like, okay, well, let's reteach you how to issue a fuel advance. Here's the processes, but it's sometimes some situations you just never run into. So you never get reintroduced to it, because maybe you touch on it during the terminology course, or you touch on it on some kind of e-learning, but it never happens again. And then when it comes to process, I got to be like, what is this, day 1, man? Come on, we learned this. But if they've never ran across that situation again, you can't expect them to learn it. There's a lot of perishable skills that just go away.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be briefly story time for me here, because you touched on a couple of things.
Yeah.
So, like, you mentioned people like forgetting things over time. There's that whole forgetting curve idea, where if things aren't reinforced, like you're going to forget 90% of what you were taught. And so when you have these 2-week-long training courses, right, Like no one's going to remember all of that. Like your crash course on brokerage. And two, like you talked about demurrage. So like I'm a full truckload guy, right? Like my background is domestic full truckload brokerage, but I'm a member of the Chicago Traffic Club, and it's very dominated by rail people. And I go and like visit a rail yard with them a few weeks ago. And at the same time, we're building out a drayage course for Sync. And some guy's talking to me. He's like, so like, it's like the difference between detention, demurrage, and per diem. And I'm like, dude, I have literally I've been doing this for 15 years. I have no idea what the difference between those three things are. Maybe I knew at some point, but like, you're speaking a different language to me.
Yeah.
So
I honestly, I just threw that term out there because I know it's one that I don't say much. And honestly, I probably couldn't tell you what exactly it is right now without looking it up. So
yeah, like you get very pigeonholed into little specialties, and you don't realize how much more there is until you're kind of exposed to it. And you're like, oh my God, I don't know anything about drayage, do I? Anyway.
Well, we say riches are in your niches, right? So people, what you can get when it comes to selling, right? When you know what you know it well, and then you can sell on it. Like I ran fresh and frozen poultry for years. I was the chicken guy on the sales floor. I mean, I was able to deadhead trucks 300 miles outside of Dallas to pick up in Northwest Arkansas because that's how well I knew the chicken industry. But I couldn't tell you how to do a flatbed load of lumber or drywall because I know it probably should need tarps because you don't want that wet. And that's just because I used to haul lumber or drywall when I was, a little truck driver back in 2006. But
I got another story about fresh chicken, but I'll save that for a different day. Anyway, incorporating more training in people's day-to-days. Actionable takeaways for folks.
Plenty of
Mike,
fresh chicken.
You want to go next?
Well, I really like what Scott talked about. I like the word of the day because like you said, you're reinforcing, whatever that term is, whatever that process is. You could do that through a quick video clip on an email. You could do that through a quick social post. You could highlight somebody and their strengths, on a particular process that you want to continue to promote. You could highlight them internally, whether it be on your website, on a blog, whether it be on a social media post on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook, depending, or internally in your intranet, right? So I would guess I would build upon as far as daily basis goes, and again, as Scott indicated, and I love some of the comments, Scott. By the way, we're going to have you sing by the time we're done here. And some of these comments,
thank you, Kyle.
That are coming in on the sideline, but I again, just to pigtail to build upon that is it's something every single day, right? Even like Georgette and Scott talked about the micro learning, because it just has to be consistent. Because that keeps it fresh, that keeps it creative, and people will engage. Because after you get over a certain period of time, we all know people just check out, and so you've got to do it in that manner.
Georgette, look like you're gonna say something.
No, I was just thinking every day is pretty ambitious. I'm sitting here gathering ideas from Scott. And the other thing that resonated is, when you don't use particular terminology or you're not working with a particular mode, like how do I make that information available at someone's fingertips? Like how do you make that information available to an individual without like a person being involved? Like if you have a lean team, how can we create those resources? What are those resources? So if somebody does need that, they know where to go and how to get it like quickly. Those are the things that came to mind when Scott was sharing, because I'm like, gosh, that's the day in the life, because sometimes you need to consider a different mode, but you haven't used that, you haven't sold that. What do we do? So I'm over here, the wheels are turning.
like an in-house library, so to speak, with whether it be terms or videos or processes. And again, you got to make that interesting, or because if people go and they're looking at a training manual that's 40 pages long, I'm out, right? So
Right.
it's got to be short, it's got to be sweet, it's got to be easy access.
Yeah.
We're fans of one pagers here. Like if we can build a one pager off of Truckload, if we can build a one pager off of LTL, let's build it up. Let's make it pretty. Let's Armstrong it up. Let's throw some color on it because people want to look at that. Some people, they just want, give me it black and white. Okay, well, here's the manual. Read up, buddy. But people don't want to have to go through, okay, well, I'm going to search modes. Okay, now I'm going to search Truckload. Now I'm going to search this and then read black and white. He's like, hey, here's a one pager on the different types of open decks there are. This is what a removable gooseneck looks like. This is what a Conestoga looks like. This is what a regular flatbed. This is what a drop deck. This is what a double drop. Why and what's the purpose of a double drop? What's the purpose of a step deck? Right? Okay, maximum height depends on what state they're running through. It's all that stuff can be all on a one pager. Surprisingly, now international shipping, that's a different story. You just have to get with someone you know.
So before I go off on a different tangent here, our next question is about what role leaders play. I know we touched on it a little bit earlier. Do we want to continue down that road, talking about the role leaders played? Anybody have additional comments on that?
Just make sure they're involved. Just be involved. If you're a leader watching, be involved. Be part of it. If you feel that there is something that can be added to the training or something adjusted to the training, speak up. And then trainers don't take offense to how bad your training is or how good your training is. It's like these guys see it on the sales floor. If you're going to give them, pardon my language, half-ass training and then push them up on the floor, expect them to know how to dial on this thing they call a phone, and you never taught them how to pick up the handle, who looks dumb, right?
Well,
Some of the basics.
We see that a lot. I see that a lot. I'll see someone will take a high performer. We talk about high performers, and they'll have them manage people or processes, and then don't give that high performer the right training, and then no one can understand why. Geez, the high performers numbers are coming down. Well, his or her numbers are coming down because they're spending time trying to help other people, and they don't know how to manage people, and they've never had the support to do that. So you've got to give them. Not only does the leadership have to have the buy-in to set that culture, they've got to support those high performers if that's the route you're going to go, with the right tools and the right training to make everybody else as successful as they are, or it's 1 and 1 is going to equal half of 1. It's going to equal 0.5 instead of 3.
Yeah, I'll just add that, like, for trainers, ask for feedback. And ask for critical feedback. If somebody tells you it's good, okay, what could I do more, better, or differently? So, because there's always a little something there. So be open to critical feedback and ask for critical feedback. And then, Michael, what you mentioned about, taking a high performer and putting them in a leadership role, so often high performers can't manage regular performers because oftentimes they are internally motivated, and so they're a high performer. They're going to be a high performer no matter what. So it's hard for them to understand how to coach others that aren't doing it, right? Because they're like, I don't understand. It's so easy because you're in high performance.
Pick up the phone and start
So,
dialing.
so giving them the tools to
right?
coach and offer feedback and setting them up for success, because we don't want to frustrate our high performers, and we also want to give team members an opportunity to be successful, right? We want to give them the coaching to raise up to the challenge.
To add to that, give them the tools, right? Sorry, Mike. I was going to say, give them the tools to know, like, if you're going to expect your leaders, so my high leaders, if you're going to expect your sales managers to track KPIs, you better teach them how to look and where to look for those KPIs are. Like, hey, you can't come to them and say, hey, this guy's supposed to be doing $250, $300 a week, and he's going to be logging this many intro calls, this many discovery calls, this many emails. But you've never taught them how to look those up. That's a failure on your part.
Yep.
I think that ties in really well. to the next question of like, how do you continue to train people at different stages in their career? Because this is something that, from what I see, brokers struggle with a ton, right? We mentioned it earlier. Maybe you have the new hire training, but at that point, does training stop, right? Like that guy who is booking X number of loads a day, making tons of money, is training done for that person when they go into management roles, when they change positions, when they're just kind of bored, right? Like they've plateaued. Like, how do you go about continuing to educate these people throughout their careers? Who wants that one first?
I'll touch on it because this is where at a point I feel we are at. It's like we can shove management books down. We can shove, different webinars for people to watch. But if we can't adopt management level training to the industry we're in, then we're just another management training tool, right? Anybody can pull up a John C. Maxwell leader's guide and read through it, right? They're going to teach you how to be a leader, but how is it you need to create a leadership program for your industry specific or your role specific, because a carrier sales lead is not going to need to know how to teach someone or maintain someone's customer sales KPIs, right? They don't need that part of the training. It's good to know, but that's not what his goal is. That's not what their goal is. Their goal is to do continued training for that carrier sales rep. And so develop a training program, a management training program that is congruent or in collaboration with your industry and with your specific role.
Well, I think also, Nick, it rolls back to really your hiring process and the personality of the individuals that you want in your building. Because you can have a high performer, as Georgette talked about, who's a selfish individual. Part of it is how we're compensating those individuals in fairness to them, but part of it is also maybe how they're wired and what's their personality. And if you don't have individuals that have an interest in mentorship, an interest in guidance or coaching or helping. I know I come from that area, but if you, that's kind of what I do. If you don't have that in your building, that person who's been around a long period of time, they're just collecting a paycheck for you, and they're not really helping the company giving back. So it really almost rolls back to the personality and the internal culture of your office. And I don't mean a culture of learning. I just mean a culture in general, right? What are your core values, and are you hiring people to those core values? And are they more than just platitudes on the wall, right? And how do we give people that are later in their career to remember what it was like to be that newbie and be a little nervous and trying to put food on the table for your family, and how do you help them do that? And give back, because it helps everybody along the way. And if you don't have those folks in your building, it's very difficult. As Scott said, you can shove the training down the throat, but they're just checking the box. It's not really helping the company or helping them.
Yeah, and I'll add, I guess, two things. So, how do you kind of address the learning needs of folks at different stages of their career? I think just understanding the use cases on where they are. What is the profile? What do they care about at each stage? And then just your different employee use cases, and being very specific and providing something that's relevant. And I think caring enough to provide something that's relevant versus peanut butter spread. So relevant to the employee and relevant to the company and what's going to drive business objectives. And then the second piece that Scott mentioned about creating a managerial program that is like relevant to your industry. I think one of the things that I did with our leaders here is we did a leadership SWOT analysis, because again, my background is leadership development. I can talk to you all day about developing leaders and books and courses and workshops and academies. But if it's not relevant, and I didn't find it relevant to Moat Global specific, so we sat down and we did a SWOT analysis with our leadership team to understand what are our strengths as a leadership team, what are our weaknesses, what opportunities do we have, what are the threats in the terms of our business objectives. So we say that we want to accomplish these enterprise objectives. Do we have the current leadership skill set to lead folks to get us there? And if we don't, where do we need to improve? And then, so again, lots of listening to hear their thoughts, and then pulling out trends based on what I hear. These are the leadership competencies that are most relevant to Mode Global. Because as you know, you can go to FYI book on competencies. There are millions of competencies, but what are the competencies, the few that are relevant to our company, and then how do we develop those? So it helps you to tell the story, right? So then we go back to, I went back to the leaders to say, okay, based on what we're trying to accomplish, here's what I heard from you guys. Here are the competencies that apply to us. Do you agree? Don't you agree? What's missing? And then build from there. So when I tell the story to our frontline leaders, our sales leaders, any leaders here, I have the story to tell that this is how we're going to get where we're going. This got us here. This is gonna get us there. So it really is, for me, always providing something that's relevant to employees, no matter where they are, because I think they care more if they know that you care about them and where they're going versus to check a box to say I gave you training.
Mm-hmm. It's good.
Yeah, it was amazing. I have, there's like, right? There's one question left. We got like 4 minutes. Like we can try to breeze through. How does onboarding set the stage for building a culture of learning? Anybody want to hit on this one quickly? Just do the rounds on it.
Yeah, I think because I've been just starting things off, but I think we go back to creating that structure, creating it consistent, and having leader buy-in. I mean, if your leaders know the training that is going on, they're aware of it, and they're they believe in it, then keep it consistent, and then it'll just continue to grow. And as long as us as the L&D team continue to get that feedback, start building it, more efficiencies, and don't get offended by when one of them says, hey, I think we need to do this instead. Always evolve it. Always, during COVID, everything was online. We said, okay, here, do this. And then we provide feedback. And then after we got over the flattening the curve and we had people start coming back in, we had to evolve from e-learning to more instructor led, and we got that buy-in. The leaders enjoyed seeing actual courses being taught instead of these guys sitting in a room with headphones and just consuming content when they're not truly consuming content. So start from the beginning.
I'll add what Scott onto Scott is, like, when you onboard people, you start setting norms within the company. Mm-hmm. So that first experience with learning, with training, you start to set the norm on what's expected. You start to build the culture. This is how we do it here. This is what you can expect here. And I think if you can start with onboarding, it just sets the norms with new employees.
Well, it creates a consistency, right? It creates, like you said, the expectations and the consistency, and then you have to have the ability to manage those exceptions when it doesn't occur in a positive fashion, right? What you're going to do to correct it.
All right, I think that was great. We're going to use that as our stopping point because it's basically 3:00. Let's go around real quickly. So in case anyone ever wants to reach out to you guys directly, how do they do it? Georgette, we'll start with you again.
I am Georgette.hunter-franklin@modeglobal.com. You can also just connect with me on LinkedIn and look forward to connecting with you guys.
Perfect. Freight Sensei, what about you?
Yeah. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Email Scott@armstrongtransport.com. one of the originals. That's why I still got just my first name. And then, Instagram at the Freight Sensei. If you want to just keep consuming those freight tip. I'm on TikTok too, but that's like for kids. So it's whatever.
All right. I know your audience.
Repurposing content.
All right. And Mike, what about you? How do people reach out?
Certainly LinkedIn is the easiest, and mine is Mike at morethanmilesconsulting.com, all one word.
All right. Well, perfect. Everybody, thanks for watching. Guests, Georgette, Scott, Mike, thanks for being on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks,
I thought this
guys.
was great, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Thank
See ya.
you. Thanks,
See you
guys. Have a
guys.
great day.